It's a pleasure to take part in this debate. The bill, as you know, is being rushed through by a Labour government desperate to paper over the cracks of an economy which it itself has brought to a shuddering halt. And so many of the questions that are coming before the House at the moment result from that economic flatlining and the flailing of a government which casts around desperately to see how it can get itself off that economic hook. Put simply, this bill is unaffordable. The Prime Minister's latest concessions to his unruly and now happy and victorious backbenchers has left the Exchequer with a £5 billion gap to plug. And this inevitably means higher taxes for hard-working families already feeling the pinch. And far too few of those voices will be heard today, too often in this House. The whole debate is consumed with how more spending is a better thing, how it can always be afforded, and no responsible decisions need to be made. That was the decision of the backbenchers of the party opposite. It wrested away from the front bench control of one of the flagships of this government's agenda and leaves the government now like some great, massively endowed as it is with members of Parliament, like some gigantic ship that has lost all power and propulsion, sitting listing at sea, waiting for the next wave to come along. And as we know in this chamber, that the next wave that comes along and buffets from the left this Labour government is all too often the Honourable Lady, who I'm happy to give way to now.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I hope he's not suggesting in his comments that those hard-working families who use PIP to be able to get to work are not voices that we should hear in this chamber.
Yeah. Well, I would absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady that we should consider people like that. I think of the lady who came to see me on Saturday at my street surgery, who's concerned about the PIP process and, from her point of view, the brutality of it and the way she and her husband, who has a degenerative progressive disease for which there is no cure, are put through the ringer in order to justify, which to anyone with any common sense could see, is a situation which clearly deserves support. But the Honourable Lady will be aware of the mushrooming in the claims by those with various levels of mental health challenges, far greater than previously. And ultimately, we must balance looking after people with degenerative progressive diseases in a humane and civilised manner by also making sure that we have a system which cuts out fraud, which seeks to minimise those who don't need aid, seeking it and getting it. And if only we could have a system in which people didn't claim for money which they don't deserve and need, we would be able to look after the people which I think, in one area of commonality between the Honourable Lady and myself, both she and I would want to see fairer and more generous treatment of people in that position. I will happily give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the reduction in investment in the NHS and in the mental health service support for the people of our country has led to an epidemic of people who've had to wait for support for sometimes nearly 2 years, which increases their condition and makes it harder for them to recover and go back to their normal daily life at work. And that also has increased demand on PIP.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his contribution. We, on this, I should say, side, and these days corner of the House, as Conservatives, we know that throwing money at a problem without proper safeguards is not leadership, it's not generous, it's not kind. It is in fact an abrogation of responsibility, and it is economic negligence. So let me be clear. This bill in its current form locks in billions of pounds of additional welfare spending year after year under the current Chancellor. We've already seen Britain's debt interest forecast soar and the bond market's jittery, more than jittery, charging far more than after the mini-budget to which members opposite so love to refer. And inflation, of course, has proven stubbornly high. Now we have yet another unfunded spending commitment, with no plan to pay for it except reaching deeper into taxpayers' pockets. The Chancellor might not say it outright, but families in Beverley and Holderness and across the country know exactly where this ends up, with them paying more. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister can indulge in his favourite hobby of U-turning and U-turning his way throughout his time in office. But that is not governing in the national interest, which is exactly what he promised to do. It is the latest example of the Prime Minister bending to pressure from the left of his party, so well represented on the benches opposite today, desperate as he is to shore up support for a drifting government which has lost now all propulsion. Instead of fixing the underlying problems in our economy, which was promised, the foundations, if you remember those phrases so oft repeated, Labour has chosen the easy political route for it. Higher spending, higher borrowing, and inevitably higher taxes. Not on some mythical class of super-rich people, which the Greens like to propose. No, on ordinary men and women. People who get up in the morning, work hard, and look after themselves and recognise personal responsibility as a central tenet of their lives, and that needs to be a central tenet of our political lives. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why I've tabled two amendments to this bill. The first, Amendment 41, ensures that Parliament retains control over future annual above-inflation increases. It means that the House of Commons must explicitly approve continuing these rates beyond 2027 to 2028, protecting against open-ended commitments that we cannot afford. The second, New Clause 9, requires the Government to report on fraud and error arising from the provisions which we are debating today. Given the scale of welfare fraud we have seen in recent years, it already costs the taxpayer more than £8 billion. It's only right that we get a proper handle on where taxpayers' money is actually going. Together, I would happily give way if there were members opposite who had an interest in controlling the public finances. If there were members opposite who wanted to show responsibility with the public finances, not running up the national credit card irresponsibly, which is their want. And those efforts by the front bench opposite have now come to naught. They have given in to their backbenchers and they no longer have any control or say on the direction of this government. Together, these straightforward safeguards to protect the public purse will be there and help reduce waste and misuse. Now, I have no doubt that the Secretary of State will stand up today and try to paint this as a fair and measured bill. And members opposite can shout and scream in frustration, but they will have their time to speak, Madam Deputy Speaker. But in reality, this is not a fair and measured bill. It achieves nothing but a two-tier benefit system, unfunded spending commitments, and ultimately higher taxes for ordinary working people. And it's telling that the Secretary of State has not matched these spending increases with robust plans to tackle fraud and error, or indeed tie any uplifts with measures to help people back into work. In short, she has failed to ensure that there are clear performance measures in place in order to guarantee value for money for the taxpayer. Without that, taxpayers will continue on their slippery slope of simply paying more while getting less. And if the honourable gentleman, so energetically rising from his place, can tell us how he is committed to making sure that the public finances of this country are kept in a healthy state, the House looks forward with bated breath.
I'm really intrigued, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the honourable member suggested that he has a concern about tackling fraud and responsibility in public finances. Can he tell us where he was under the last government when fraud in the benefit system hit its highest level ever seen in the history of the UK social security system? Where are his references in Hansard? Where was he on bill committees and in this House when that fraud was soaring? And where was he when this government began passing legislation to tackle that horrific level of irresponsible fraud in the benefit system?
Within 12...
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that as the benefit system grows, the likelihood is that fraud will grow within it. But I applaud all efforts to crack down on fraud, and that's what I'm calling for. Greater efforts by the front bench to do that. But he knows that it is those on the back benches that now are calling the shots, not those sitting on the front bench. Ultimately, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, all roads lead back to the Treasury. The truth is that this bill is not the product of serious policy making, neither in its inception nor in its eventual outcome now, gutted and filleted as it has been by a triumphant left within the Labour Party. It is the product, instead, of panic, a rushed response to economic pressures caused by a feeble Chancellor who has brought the economy to a halt. It's been written not with reform in mind, but rebellion in the rear-view mirror. And the result is a muddled, mean-spirited piece of legislation that satisfies no one, least of all the vulnerable people who will suffer under it, or the British taxpayer who will pay for it. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he's right to bring it back to the vulnerable people who would be impacted. The Honourable Member will know that the devastating impact of cancer on many families, 1 and 2, face the reality of a cancer diagnosis. Young Cancer Lives v Cancer have said that it costs on average £700 a month in costs and £6,000 loss in annual income. Would he agree with me that this current bill will ensure that these people don't get the high-rate universal credit health element, and that will be devastating for many cancer patients right across this country?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to highlight the plight of cancer sufferers and the need to have a system which is more generous to those who genuinely need it, but is also tougher in making sure that the funding goes there, to the places where it is most required. Under this Chancellor, as we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain risks a return to the same old Labour habits. Spend today, tax tomorrow, and leave the mess for someone else to clear up. We saw it under Gordon Brown. We're seeing it again today. The public deserve better than another Labour tax and spend spiral that leaves less money in their pockets and less resilience in our economy. The bill in its current form is a short-term fix with long-term costs. It fails to tackle fraud, fails to address getting people back into work. Despite all the protestations that came from ministers that it had anything to do with that, it does not. Fails to guarantee value for money and fails working families by paving the way for inevitable tax rises. If Labour wants to be taken seriously on economic credibility, it needs to start by showing some discipline on spending, not indulging in a spending spree that Britain simply can't afford. The Prime Minister promised a serious government. Remember that? A grown-up government. Yet here we are debating a confused, divisive bill whose main achievement so far is to split the Prime Minister's own benches. If the Honourable Lady wants to tell me this isn't confused, it isn't divisive, and it hasn't been driven by the ructions on the backbenches, I look forward to hearing from her.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. The Right Honourable Gentleman, or the Honourable Gentleman, will understand that it's for me to decide what my intervention is.
Hear.
My intervention is to say that I was very pleased to hear him sticking up for people who really need help. So which clause of his amendment actually makes it better for people who need help?
Well, the Honourable Lady should recognise that looking after the public finances, minimising fraud and ensuring that this House keeps control of public expenditure is exactly in the interests of the most vulnerable, because who will it be, Madam Deputy Speaker, who will pay the highest price as this economic spiral goes downwards? Who will it be? It'll be who it always is under a Labour government. Ordinary working people, and then the increasing numbers of the unemployed and vulnerable and disabled people. They're always the one that pay the price for a Labour government. When the Labour government last left power in 2010, youth unemployment was up by 45%. 45%. That was the record of vulnerable young people who are more vulnerable to the negative impacts of unemployment than anything else. And it is them who are always let down by a Labour government, and always let down most of all by a Labour government which isn't run by those with some sense of public finance control, but by backbenchers who are out of control. I'll happily give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And would you not agree with me that it's 14 years of a Conservative government that led us to a 29% disability employment gap, a 17% pay gap, 4 million disabled people in poverty, and the UN telling this government over its first half of that decade that it failed almost on every single commitment in the Convention on the Rights of Disabled People?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, who I respect a great deal. She will be aware that the last Conservative government saw millions more disabled people coming into the employment market. I think around 2.5, possibly as many as 3 million more disabled people entering the employment market and having the dignity of work. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer have no credible plan to get our economy growing. Hard-working families in Beverley and Holderness and right across the country deserve better than another Labour government chasing short-term headlines at the cost of long-term economic growth and stability.
I call Rachel Maskell.
Thank you.